January 22, 1945. Southern Germany. The snow had come hard the night before, burying the narrow roads of the Allgäu region under 2 feet of silence. The Reich was collapsing. From the east, the Red Army tore through Poland. From the west, the Americans pushed into Alsace. In the mountain town of Oberstedt, only a few miles from the crumbling Siegfried Line, the last ambulances returned from the front. Inside one of them lay a soldier in American fatigues, his dog tags ripped off, his uniform hidden under a tattered Wehrmacht coat, and a bullet wound festering in his side. Nurse Elsa Weiss thought she was treating a wounded German. Until she saw the tattoo, a faded blue ink on his forearm, a leaping Mustang with the words 101st Airborne. The American blinked up at her, barely conscious. And Elsa, 28, raised in a family loyal to the Reich, daughter of a deceased party member, trained under strict SS medical doctrine, froze. Not because she feared what she had found, but because he whispered her name before passing out. The town hospital was no more than a converted church, pews replaced with beds, the altar covered in morphine bottles and surgical clamps. A Red Cross flag hung limply in the cold draft. There were 13 patients in the triage room. Most were Wehrmacht stragglers pulled from the Ardennes retreat. 2 had frostbite down to the bone. 1 wouldn't survive the night. Elsa stood over the American's cot, heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had checked the other nurses were gone. The SS medical officer was inspecting supplies in the cellar. She leaned close to the man's face. "Who are you?" she whispered in German. No answer, just shallow breathing, his chest rising like a man on the edge of drowning. She peeled back the coat again. Beneath the bloodied bandage, the olive-drab wool of a U.S. field uniform showed through. She should have raised the alarm, called the officer, reported the spy. Instead, she walked calmly to the back storeroom and locked the door. He woke 5 hours later, shivering, fevered, and mumbling in English. Elsa stood at his bedside. She had cleaned the wound, flushed it with iodine, and redressed it using cotton she'd hidden from the inventory count. The American blinked at her again, eyes blue, faded, exhausted. He tried to speak but only rasped. She lifted a tin cup to his lips. "Don't talk," she said in English. "You'll bleed again." He tried to sit up, pain racked his face. "Where am I?" She answered, "You're in Oberstedt, South Bavaria, a hospital, but they can't know what you are." His gaze sharpened. You're helping me." "I don't know," she said, lying. She already knew. His name was James Halbrook, Private First Class, 101st Airborne, shot during a night drop near Nennig, left behind by his squad when they were overrun by Panzer Grenadiers. He'd crawled west for 3 days before collapsing in a snow-covered orchard. German farmers found him, mistaking him for one of their own, and called a medic. That medic, young, overwhelmed, and 2 weeks from deserting himself, hadn't looked too closely. By the time Elsa received him, James Halbrook was a ghost, dying, yes, but not dead. And he was American. Elsa had never touched a man like him before. She had tended the wounds of German boys since 1941, some crying for their mothers, others screaming the Führer's name with dying breath. But this man... He thanked her, in broken German and English, with his eyes even when he couldn't speak. He didn't grovel or curse. He didn't beg or threaten. He simply survived. And when he was strong enough to sit up, when he asked her why she hadn't reported him, Elsa didn't answer. She only asked, "Do you have family in Kentucky?" He smiled, "Tennessee." She found herself smiling back. The war outside drew closer by the hour. Rumors spread among staff that American patrols had breached the Danube, that Himmler had declared traitors would be hanged in every town, that deserters and spies would be executed without trial. The SS inspector, Hauptsturmführer Meissner, returned to the hospital every evening with a notebook and a pistol on his belt. He had a habit of watching Elsa too closely. And one night he asked her, "Why do you keep the storeroom locked?" Elsa didn't flinch. "There are morphine bottles inside. A patient tried to steal one last week." Meissner studied her a moment longer than necessary. Then he walked away. She knew he would return. James grew stronger, enough to limp, enough to whisper full sentences, but the wound hadn't fully healed and a single wrong move would tear it open again. She hid him during inspections, under floorboards once, behind false shelving the next. In the chapel, she taught him to sit still in a monk's robe as a coughing nun. The SS searched the building twice. The second time they brought dogs. Elsa had smeared antiseptic on James' blanket and burned his soiled bandages. The dogs caught no scent. When they left, she vomited in the snow outside. By February, Allied artillery could be heard in the mountains at night. The sky flashed on the horizon like distant lightning, and still, Elsa kept him alive. She brought him newspapers when she could, let him read the German lies. "We are victorious. The Ardennes has broken the enemy." He laughed dryly. "Sure, and I'm the King of France." One night as they shared a crust of bread, he asked her, "Why did you save me?" Elsa looked at him, the dark hollows beneath his eyes, the faded scar beneath his ear, the stubborn way he still stood when his body screamed to lie down. And she answered truthfully, "Because you didn't look like a killer." He smiled again. "Neither do you." She lowered her eyes. "You're wrong." By March, there were only 2 nurses left in the hospital. The others had been conscripted or arrested. Meissner had grown suspicious. He now visited twice a day, and one evening he caught Elsa slipping a bandage roll into her coat. She lied quickly. "There's a wounded child in the village, I promised his mother." Meissner narrowed his eyes. "I will walk with you to make sure it's used properly." Elsa froze. The storeroom door was unlocked. James had only seconds to react. She needed a miracle. What happened next was neither miracle nor plan. It was instinct. She dropped the bandage, clutched her stomach, and collapsed into the snow, groaning. "Food poisoning," she gasped. "I've been sick since this morning." Meissner cursed, pulled back, and snarled, "Stupid girl, you'll infect the patients." She was shaking, convincingly, from real fear. The SS officer stormed off. That night James held her hand as she trembled. "You saved me again," he said. She didn't respond. But she didn't let go. The thaw came early. By the second week of March, the snowmelt turned the mountain trails to slush and rivers swelled through the valleys. American reconnaissance planes began to fly lower, closer. Their silver bellies flashed like signals overhead, and every farmer in Oberstetten began hiding their radios. James Halbrook stood for longer each day. His limp was permanent now. The bullet had torn through the muscle too deeply, but he could walk short distances. Elsa helped him train at night between wards under cover of blackout curtains. She had even found him boots that fit, taken from a dead Luftwaffe pilot who never made it out of the ambulance. "Better than frostbite," James joked, flexing the toe, "but these smell like defeat." She smiled weakly. Humor had become their last shared language. The war around them had narrowed to a singular orbit, a man with a wound and a woman with everything to lose. They both knew the storm was circling. The front was 30 kilometers away, maybe less. The Wehrmacht was retreating on every road, and Oberstetten was now caught between collapse and retribution. Deserters were being shot in nearby towns. Collaborators hanged from barn rafters. And the SS had begun asking about loyalty in quieter tones. It was no longer enough to serve. You had to believe. Meissner came back on March 15th. This time he didn't ask questions. He simply stood in the hospital hallway at dusk, staring at Elsa as she changed a bandage on a patient's leg. His boots were spotless, his coat pressed, but his eyes were hungry. He said nothing for a full minute. "Then you work late." "I always have." "I'm told supplies go missing under your watch." "They go missing everywhere. There's a war." Meissner smiled slightly. "Are you tired, Nurse Weiss?" She forced herself to breathe slowly. "No." "Then good, because tomorrow you'll accompany me to the checkpoint in Marktoberdorf. They'll be inspecting medical staff. It will be good to show them we have nothing to hide." She nodded, of course. But the moment he turned the corner, she ran. James was in the storage room, asleep on a cot that was stacked behind boxes of vinegar bottles and wooden crutches. She woke him with a whisper and trembling hands. "They're going to move me tomorrow for inspection. It's a trap. If they bring dogs or sniffers or—" He sat up slowly, wincing. "Then I have to leave." "You can't walk more than 50 meters. "Then I'll crawl." She shook her head, panic mounting in her throat. "You don't understand. If they find you, they won't just kill you. They'll kill me. They'll make an example." His hand reached hers, warm, dry, steady. "Then we disappear tonight." There was no plan, no map, no safe house, just instinct and desperation. She packed what she could: dried bread, 2 syringes of morphine, a bottle of water. She found him a woolen civilian coat and took off his dog tags. He insisted she keep them. "Why?" "If I don't make it, someone should know who I was." She stared at the metal tags, fingers curled tightly around them. She didn't say what she was thinking. "You're not going to die. Not like this. Not in Germany. Not while I still have blood in my hands." They left the hospital just before midnight. She timed it between Meissner's patrols. A fog had rolled in thick across the roads, masking them in perfect silence. They moved quickly through the lower village, sticking to barns and hedgerows. The only sound was the distant rumble of artillery. James could walk, but barely. Every 50 meters he had to rest. She would prop him up, loop his arm over her shoulders, and press forward. They made it 5 kilometers before the first patrol. 3 soldiers, Wehrmacht, one with a flare gun, the other 2 with carbines slung lazily over their shoulders. They stood near a burned-out truck, arguing about fuel. Elsa heard their voices before they saw them and pulled James down into a ditch. "We can't turn back," he whispered. "We don't," she said, and pulled the syringe from her bag. It wasn't a weapon. Not exactly, but war makes everything a weapon if you're willing to cross a line. They waited until the patrol wandered closer. Then she stood suddenly, stumbling out of the fog, cloak wrapped tight around her body. "Help," she shouted. "My brother, he's sick, fever, he collapsed, please." The soldiers rushed toward her. One knelt beside James. In the blink of a moment, she stabbed the needle into the man's neck. The morphine worked fast, not lethal but enough to drop a horse. The soldier slumped, the others shouted. James grabbed one of the carbines. Elsa raised her voice louder. "Deserters! There are deserters in the ravine!" Confusion erupted. The soldiers turned on each other, shouting, unsure of who to trust. Elsa fired a warning shot into the air and screamed, "He's a traitor!" in the general direction of the unconscious soldier. Panic spread like fire. Within seconds, the patrol scattered. They vanished into the woods before backup arrived. James didn't speak for an hour. His breath was ragged, his side bleeding again. She rewrapped the bandage in silence, hands shaking with adrenaline. "You're not a nurse," he whispered finally. "You're a ghost." "No," she said, "I'm a coward. You stabbed a Nazi in the neck with morphine. And I lied about my brother." He laughed weakly. "Still counts." They reached a cabin near a logging road by morning. It had once belonged to an old hunter, now long dead or drafted. Elsa had found it once on a hike as a teenager. It had a fireplace, a rusted stove, and a mattress stuffed with straw. It was enough. She built a fire, cooked what they had, and watched James sleep for 12 hours. By the next evening, she knew they wouldn't make it any further. So she made a choice. They would wait. If the Allies reached them first, they might live. If the SS did, they would die together. But at least they would not run anymore. She wrote her name on the dog tags next to his, using a shard of charcoal. James woke up, saw what she'd done, and didn't speak. Instead, he reached for her hand and held it until night fell again. The forest was quiet. The Reich was dying, and in a cabin far from any front, the woman who was supposed to turn him in had chosen to become his final shelter instead. The cabin became its own kind of world. Outside, the war marched toward them in invisible lines, artillery thunder drifting through the trees, scout planes slicing above the clouds. Inside, the fire crackled, the snow melted off the roof in slow drips, and silence lived in the spaces between breathing. James Halbrook had been in combat for nearly a year in Normandy, in Holland, in the forests of Bastogne. He had slept in trenches, bomb craters, foxholes, but nothing felt as strange or as dangerous as the quiet of that cabin, because it was not just hiding, it was waiting. Elsa Weiss no longer wore her nurse's coat. She moved in the heavy wool of her father's old hiking gear, thick layers, worn at the elbows, dusted with ash from firewood. She cooked small meals, rationing every crumb, boiled water with herbs, used what medical supplies she had left with surgical precision, and spoke less each day. James noticed. "Say something," he said one afternoon as she stitched a tear in his coat. She glanced up, needle paused in the wool. "Like what?" "Anything. It's been hours since you looked me in the eye." Her hands didn't stop. "I'm watching the fire. I like the quiet." He waited a beat, then asked softly, "Do you think we'll make it?" "I think," she said without blinking, "that either the Allies will reach us or the SS will, and the time between now and then is the only time that's ours." She said it without emotion, but he saw the tremble in her fingers. It had been 3 weeks since they escaped the hospital. The village had changed. A patrol car had been seen near the southern road. Gunfire echoed through the valley some nights, short, sharp bursts, the kind that ended in silence. James offered to leave twice. She refused to let him. The second time she snapped, "You'd be dead in 2 hours, and if they found your body they'd track you back here. I'd die anyway." He stopped asking. There was a map folded into the bottom of the supply box. Elsa studied it at night by candlelight, marking American advances with pencil slashes, each one closer than the last. But the towns surrounding them were still under Nazi control, farms burned to prevent foraging, roads mined. Escape meant risking everything. They had one rifle with no ammunition, a rusted Luger left behind in a barn with 2 rounds in the magazine. Elsa kept it under the floorboard. James hadn't touched it. Instead, they passed the time with memory. He told her about Tennessee, about his brother's pickup truck and the baseball team he'd been scouted for before the war, about the girl he'd dated who threw a whiskey bottle at his head when he told her he was enlisting. Elsa told him about medical school in Munich, her mother's hands always scrubbing something, her father's funeral draped in a flag she now hated. She admitted one night that she had lied to join the Red Cross, forged a certification. She wasn't yet qualified, but they needed nurses and no one checked too closely anymore. He looked at her, the candlelight catching in the strands of her hair. "You saved my life." She looked back at him and said, "You ruined mine." Then after a long silence she added, "And I'd do it again." That night they slept on opposite sides of the room, but neither slept at all. On April 3rd, a shot rang out near the trail behind the cabin. Elsa froze where she was, ladling broth into a tin. James was already off the cot, one hand braced against the wall. She lowered the ladle. Carefully, slowly, she pressed her finger to her lips. Another shot. Closer. She went to the window. A figure moved in the tree line, slow, hunched, clutching something. then another, then a third. Refugees. A woman, a child, and a man with half a leg, dragging himself forward. Elsa threw open the door before James could stop her. They were frostbitten, German, civilians. The man had been shot through the thigh clean but untreated. The child had no coat. Elsa let them in without hesitation. James vanished into the back room. She treated them without questions, gave them the last of the bread, told them to rest until morning. At dawn they were gone, and with them, one of the 2 morphine vials James had left. He said nothing about it, only asked if the child was warm when they left. 2 days later, another figure appeared. This time it was a boy in uniform, 15, maybe 16, Luftwaffe cadet by the cut of his coat. Elsa spotted him just beyond the tree line, lost, coughing, face streaked with dirt. She gave James the signal. He hid. The boy collapsed before she reached him. Pneumonia, early stage. She nursed him back over 3 days, gave him soup, rubbed his chest with salve. He didn't ask where her brother was. He barely spoke. On the 4th morning, he was gone. And this time, the map was missing. James confronted her that night. "You can't keep bringing them here." She stared at him, arms folded. "I can't let them die. They're going to get you killed. They're children, and you're a soldier. And I'm not asking you to let them die. I'm asking you to choose." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I already did." James stepped closer, then stopped trying to die on the side. Her hand moved fast. The slap echoed in the cabin. He didn't react, just stood there breathing. Then she broke. Tears welled up, not loud, not sobbing, just there, silently rolling. She turned away, covered her mouth, and whispered, "I don't know how to survive both of us." James moved to her. She didn't stop him this time. His arms closed around her gently, like snow falling on fragile glass. She shook but didn't pull back. He whispered, "We don't survive this unless you want to. I need you to want to." "I do." "Then stay with me." "I already am." It wasn't a kiss. Not at first. It was breathing together, forehead to forehead, as if nothing else in the world was real anymore. As if they had fallen off the map and into something that couldn't exist anywhere else. The radio crackled on April 9th. She had tuned it late, almost by instinct. The voice came through the static like a ghost, American, calm, deliberate. Armored columns advancing south from Ulm. Resistance collapsing west of the Lech, surrender likely within days. James stepped out of the shadows. She turned to him slowly. "It's happening," she said. He didn't ask how far. They both knew it didn't matter. The Reich was dying. And so was the time they had left. The broadcasts continued. Every night Elsa turned the dial until the static melted into American voices. Some were coded transmissions for field operatives. Others were raw updates, infantry positions, fallen cities, scattered mentions of surrender negotiations. They sat by the fire and listened together, silent. James didn't celebrate, she noticed that. No fist pumping, no grin. He only leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes locked on the flames, as if daring himself to believe it was real. "Do you think it'll be over soon?" she asked once. He nodded, "But that doesn't mean it's over for us." Outside, spring clawed its way back into the mountains. Meltwater poured down the slopes, carving new veins into the earth. The first green buds pushed through the frost. Birds returned in cautious bursts. Nature, indifferent to men's wars, resumed its rhythm. Elsa hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night. She jolted awake at the smallest sound, a snapping branch, a shifting log in the stove, a dog barking miles away. Her nerves lived in her fingertips. She kept the pistol nearby now. 2 bullets, that was all. "I dream about trains," she confessed once, eyes wide open in the dark. "Trains full of people, but they never stop, just pass by, and no one sees me, like I'm not even there." James said nothing for a long time. Then, "Do you remember the name of the first person you treated?" She did. It had been a man from Dresden, burned down both arms from a munitions factory accident. He hadn't spoken once, just groaned, eyes shut the entire time. She worked on him for 40 minutes. He died before I could finish. "Still counts," James said. "Why?" "Because you tried. That's the only part you can control." She rolled over. "Easy for you to say." "Not really. They didn't say, 'I love you.' It would have felt like fantasy, like pretending this was something else. But everything in how they moved, the closeness, the way they ate from the same tin cup without speaking, the quiet understanding made it clear. It was love, but the kind that only survives if hidden, buried, wrapped in cloth and silence, like a wound that can't be allowed to bleed. On April 12th, Elsa made a mistake. She went to the nearby farm to steal eggs. She had done it before, at night, careful, fast. But that day, the old man who owned the land was awake early. He caught her in the henhouse with her coat bulging. He didn't shout, he didn't run. He only said, "You're the nurse from Oberstetten." Her blood froze. "I saw you," he continued, "with the soldier, tall, limping, not one of ours." "I don't know what you're talking about." "I didn't say I'd tell them," he said, "but I know what happens when the SS finds a traitor." Elsa stood very still. Her hand brushed the inside of her coat pocket where the pistol was hidden. The old man lifted a hand slowly, palm open. "I don't want your gun. I want you to go now. Take the boy. Don't come back. They've been through here asking." She left the eggs behind. She didn't speak on the walk back. James could see it in her eyes the moment she entered the cabin. "We have to move," she said, "tonight." "Where?" "East, then south. There's a ravine near a stream, a trail used by smugglers. It's not safe, but it's forgotten." He didn't ask questions. He trusted her too much for that now. They packed within an hour, a satchel with 2 days' food, the pistol, the map, what was left of it, a torn scarf Elsa used to tie around her hair. He wore his civilian coat but carried the dog tags in his pocket, still etched with both their names. They left just before dusk. The trail was narrow, muddy. The ravine cut deep through the valley, flanked by cliffs on either side. The water below moved fast and loud, masking footsteps. For a while it almost felt safe. But war always moves faster than memory. At the edge of the ridge, they saw the glint of boots. A patrol, 3 men, one in SS gray, the others in brown, blocking the path ahead, rifles slung over their backs, laughing. James froze. Elsa pressed him down behind a fallen tree, her breath hitched. "What now?" he asked. "They haven't seen us," she whispered. "If we crawl down, we can loop around through the stream bed." "It's steep." "I don't care." But it wasn't steep, it was impossible. The slope dropped in a slick wall of moss and shale. James slipped on the first step, grunted. The noise echoed. One of the soldiers shouted. A flashlight beam arced through the trees. "Go," James hissed. "I'll follow." "No." "Elsa." "No." The light swept again, closer. A voice shouted in German, "Stop, show yourselves." They didn't move. A rifle fired. Bark exploded off the tree trunk inches from Elsa's face. They ran. Down the slope, through the mud, sliding, falling, scrambling. The stream was ahead, a narrow crossing point. Elsa leapt. James tried, landed hard, stumbled. Another shot. This one struck the tree behind them. Elsa grabbed his arm and pulled him upright. They ran until the shots faded behind them, lost in the roar of the water. They didn't stop until darkness swallowed everything. Only then did she realize she'd been grazed. A cut along her arm, not deep, but bleeding fast. James saw it and snapped, "Let me look at it." "I'm fine." "You're not." "I said I'm fine." They stood in the shadows of the ravine, both panting, both bleeding, both terrified. Then she collapsed against him, fists curled in his coat, sobbing soundlessly into his shoulder. He didn't say anything, just held her there, hands around her ribs until the trembling stopped. The next day they walked through birch forests blackened by shell fire. They passed burned-out vehicles, charred helmets, empty foxholes. No bodies, just echoes. They found an abandoned field kitchen, overturned, the pot still greasy with old stew. James ate without speaking. Elsa sat with her back to a tree and closed her eyes. She dreamed of the hospital chapel, of cold stone and flickering candles, of a man who once lay beneath a Wehrmacht coat, whispering her name without knowing her face. By the time they reached the far edge of the ravine on the 5th day, they saw the sign. A white star painted hastily on a sheet hanging from a burned barn, a signal. American troops had passed through. They kept walking. They crossed the field at dusk. The sheet with the American star fluttered in the wind above them, tethered to a scorched rafter. James stepped forward first, limping, his coat flapping open in the breeze. Elsa followed, her arm wrapped in a blood-specked scarf, her hand still shaking. No one greeted them. Just silence, a barn torn open by tank treads, a sign in English hammered to a post, "Civilians stay back, minefield beyond." James stopped at the threshold. "This is it," he said. "This is the line." Elsa scanned the horizon. She had imagined this moment many times, how it might feel to walk free of Reich territory, to step into American-held ground. She expected relief, but what settled in her chest wasn't relief. It was guilt. She took one step, then another. They moved slowly, deliberately, toward the remains of a village checkpoint. A white flag had been tied to a pitchfork, stuck upright in a trench. On the other side, a pile of helmets, German, left behind like shed skins. They passed into American territory before anyone saw them. The first soldier to find them wore a radio headset and sunglasses. He looked like a boy, raised his rifle automatically, then lowered it once he saw James. "Jesus Christ," the soldier muttered, stepping forward. "You're one of ours." James nodded. "Private Halbrook, 101st. The soldier blinked. "No shit," he looked at Elsa and her. James answered without hesitation. "She saved my life." They were rushed to a triage tent. Doctors checked vitals, logged names, separated the wounded from the walking. James was stripped, cleaned, bandaged. Elsa was handed a tin cup of hot broth and questioned in slow, careful English. She said very little. Just that she had been a nurse, that she had treated wounded soldiers, that she had hidden. The American medic gave her a soft nod. "You're lucky you found us when you did. We found a mass grave up the ridge, shot civilians, execution style." James looked away. Elsa stared at the floor. They were moved to a larger base 2 days later, an infantry command post near Kaufbeuren. It had once been a schoolhouse, now filled with radios, maps, cots. Elsa was given a civilian ID tag and told she'd be processed as local medical aid. James was debriefed for 4 hours. They were separated. He was taken for intelligence checks, interrogated, medical leave pending reassignment. She was moved into a barracks for displaced German civilians. They didn't see each other for 9 days. On the 10th morning, a courier arrived with a folded note. She opened it with fingers that trembled as if holding broken glass. "Canteen, 1900. She arrived early, sat alone at a metal table. The American soldiers ignored her. A few stared. One spat near her feet. She didn't move. Then he walked in. He was clean-shaven now, wore a different coat, walked straighter, looked like a man who had stepped out of hell and found the door closed behind him. He sat across from her, didn't speak for several seconds. Finally she asked, "Are you going back?" He nodded slowly. Tennessee, they said I'll ship out next month. She traced her finger along the edge of the table. And me. They want names, collaborators, doctors, officers, anyone you saw. I didn't see anyone. He nodded, good. She hesitated, they'll still suspect. They suspect everyone. A pause then. I can get you out, he said. She looked up. There's a unit headed to Paris. Refugees, civilians, we have clearance. I've got someone who owes me a favor, if we move fast. No, she said. Elsa. No, her voice didn't waver. He stared at her, hurt flickering behind his eyes. Why? She looked away. Because I'm not ready to be someone else. You wouldn't be someone else. Yes, I would. I'd be a German woman who never wore the uniform, who never signed the forms, who never looked the other way. You didn't look away. Yes, I did, her voice cracked. The canteen hummed with distant conversation. A radio played a Glenn Miller tune in the corner. She said quieter now, I love you, you know that. I know. But we survived because we were ghosts, and ghosts don't belong in the daylight. He reached across the table, took her hand. She squeezed once, then let go. They sat there for a long time, no more words, no more bargaining. That night she gave him back the dog tags. He didn't want them, but he took them anyway. They said goodbye the next morning. No one cried. She stayed in Germany, registered as a nurse with the U.S. military government, worked in triage camps for displaced persons, treated children, former POWs, pregnant mothers who had nowhere else to go. She never asked where James went. She never searched. 5 years passed. In 1950, a letter arrived at her clinic in Augsburg. The handwriting was shaky, American postage, no return address. Inside, a single photo, a farm in Tennessee, and a line written in English. We still have time. She kept it in her drawer, beneath her medical license. She never answered. But sometimes, when the wind moved through the hills just right, she swore she could hear a heartbeat that didn't belong to her own. Years passed. Elsa Weiss remained in Germany long after the Reich disappeared from its streets. The flags came down. The swastikas were chipped off the buildings, sometimes by hand, sometimes with fire. The American soldiers packed up or stayed, depending on their orders and their marriages. But Elsa stayed. Not out of punishment, not guilt, and not out of penance. She stayed because no one else wanted to remember, and she couldn't forget. She worked in medical camps near Munich, then Augsburg, then the new housing blocks in Stuttgart for war orphans. The children came with sunken eyes and no names. Many had numbers tattooed on their arms, not military numbers, but barcodes of pain, given by camps whose names no one wanted to say aloud anymore. She cleaned wounds. She delivered babies. She taught new nurses how to disinfect tools and boil water in emergencies. She didn't talk about the war unless asked. She never mentioned James Halbrook. But she kept the photograph. Folded in the back of her journal behind pressed flowers and ration slips. A black and white image of a Tennessee farmhouse, slanted porch, a fence with half its rails missing, and below it the words, "We still have time." She read it often, but she never crossed the ocean. In 1954, Elsa became part of the founding staff of a civilian hospital in Esslingen. She wore white again. The chapel was rebuilt. She lit candles there sometimes, but never prayed. Germany was different now. It had to be. The new nurses called her Frau Weiss. Some thought she was cold. Others said she was too quiet, too exacting, too distant. But no one ever questioned her judgment in an emergency. And when one of the younger women once asked, during a late shift, whether she had ever lost someone in the war, Elsa replied, "Not exactly. I found someone, then I gave them back." The girl didn't understand. That was fine. By 1960, James Halbrook was no longer in Tennessee. She didn't know that, but it was true. He had moved to Maine, bought a fishing boat, didn't marry, no children, sometimes disappeared for weeks at a time into the woods. Locals said he was quiet, polite, hard to get to know. He kept his uniform folded in a box at the back of a closet, dog tags tucked inside, 2 names still etched into the metal. He never explained the second one. One winter, a neighbor noticed him staring out at the snow, said something about the forest being too quiet. James replied, "It's quieter when it hides you." In 1973, he died of pneumonia. His body was found next to the fireplace. Half a letter was tucked under his journal. It wasn't addressed, it wasn't finished. It began, "Elsa, if you ever read this." But no one ever sent it. Back in Stuttgart, Elsa kept working until her eyesight began to blur. She retired at 68, lived alone, walked every day, never missed a Sunday market. She never remarried. Some people believed she had lost a fiancé in the war. Others assumed she had no interest in men after seeing what war did to them. But one woman knew the truth. A nurse named Anna, who had been with Elsa during the early years, who had once helped bury 6 children after a winter storm froze the generator. Anna once asked, "Did you love him?" Elsa nodded. "Enough to leave with him?" "No," Elsa said, "enough to stay behind." They never spoke of it again. In 1981, the American consulate in Munich called the hospital archives. Someone was tracing surviving members of the civilian medical corps from post-war Germany. Elsa's name had come up. When the clerk told her, she said only, "Tell them I was never a nurse. I only pretended to be one. It worked out anyway." The call ended. No one followed up. Years later, after Elsa died peacefully in her sleep at 89, they found only one personal box in her apartment. Inside was a faded photo of a Tennessee farmhouse, a ration book, a crumpled map of southern Germany marked with pencil, a pair of rusted dog tags, and a note, written in German. "I carried you until you could walk. Then I walked until you could leave. Then I stayed, because that was the only way to hold the story together. But we both know how it ends. You lived. That's enough." No name signed. The box was donated to a war museum. The curators labeled it simply, "Unknown nurse, civilian aid, date uncertain." And in Tennessee, the farmhouse in the photo still stood, rotting quietly beneath a sky that no longer remembered war. But somewhere in the walls, maybe, if the wind hit just right, a heartbeat that didn't belong to anyone still living. And didn't need to.